On January 3rd, 2026, the United States invaded a sovereign nation to enforce a currency system, and in doing so, revealed the pattern that ends every reserve currency in history. The U.S. military captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro in Operation Absolute Resolve, involving over 150 aircraft bombing infrastructure across northern Venezuela. The official justification was drug trafficking charges. But Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, and over the past 6 years, they've been selling that oil in yuan, rubles, and barter arrangements, bypassing the dollar entirely. This wasn't a war on drugs. This was dollar enforcement. And the pattern it reveals has destroyed every dominant currency system before it. Understanding this moment means understanding what happens when monetary power shifts from economic strength to military coercion. This is Economic Pattern Vault, where we break down financial history to understand how markets actually work by studying how they fail. Each video uncovers the repeating patterns behind economic booms, debt cycles, and power shifts, so you can see what's happening beneath the headlines. If you find this breakdown useful, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts or questions in the comments. Let's establish what actually happened, because the official narrative and the economic reality are two different stories. At approximately 2 a.m. local time on January 3rd, explosions rang out across Caracas as U.S. forces disabled Venezuela's air defense systems. U.S. helicopters touched down at Maduro's compound at 2:01 a.m., and within 2.5 hours, Maduro was aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier en route to New York. According to Venezuelan and Cuban officials, more than 80 people were killed in the attack, including 32 Cuban military and intelligence members. Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez reported that a large part of Maduro's security team were killed during the operation. The Trump administration framed this as law enforcement with military support. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that Maduro and his wife had been indicted in the Southern District of New York on narcoterrorism charges, superseding a 2020 indictment. But here's what the administration revealed in private conversations about motivation. The 2025 to 2026 operations served triple goals: crippling Maduro, hitting drug trade routes, and getting access to Venezuela's oil, with the Trump administration also expressing interest in Venezuela's large deposits of gold and rare earth minerals. The drug trafficking justification existed since 2020. Why execute a military invasion now, in January 2026? Because in December 2025, something changed. China and Venezuela had been negotiating an $80 billion deal over 5 years where China would rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure in exchange for 1.2 million barrels per day, all transactions in yuan. Venezuela had been systematically moving away from dollar-denominated oil sales for years. By 2025, they were selling approximately 900,000 barrels per day to China, India, Russia, and Iran, none of it priced in dollars. That's roughly $25 billion annually in oil trade happening outside the dollar system. For context, Venezuela holds 303 billion barrels in proven reserves, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than Iraq. Losing Venezuela's oil trade to the yuan system wasn't just about current sales. It was about whether the world's largest oil reserve would be permanently integrated into an alternative currency system. As recently as early December, the administration believed it was seeing cracks in Maduro's support system. But as time went by, that belief dissipated and planning for the operation began. The message was clear: if you control the world's largest oil reserves and attempt to price them outside the dollar system, the United States will remove you by force. The pattern here isn't new. It's the final stage of every reserve currency system in history. When economic incentives fail to maintain currency dominance, enforcement becomes coercive, and coercion accelerates collapse. Here's how it works. A reserve currency starts with genuine economic advantage: deeper markets, more stability, greater liquidity. Countries hold that currency because it's useful. This is soft power. But over time, the issuing country begins financing itself through currency creation rather than productive output. The reserve currency becomes a tool for transferring wealth inward. The issuing country prints. Others hold the depreciation risk. Eventually, other nations recognize they're subsidizing the reserve currency issuer's deficits. They begin looking for alternatives. The issuing country responds not by restoring economic fundamentals, but by threatening consequences for leaving the system. This is when monetary dominance shifts from soft power to hard power. And hard power in currency systems is inherently unstable because it reveals the truth. You're not holding this currency because it's the best option. You're holding it because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. The moment that fear becomes explicit, every participant starts calculating exit strategies. The system fractures not gradually, but in cascades, as each defection makes the next one safer. Rome debased its currency to finance military operations maintaining the empire. When provinces realized Roman coins were being systematically degraded, they started refusing them. Rome responded with military enforcement. The system collapsed within decades. Britain's sterling system after World War I faced the same pattern. Britain couldn't maintain gold convertibility economically, so they used political pressure and colonial control to enforce sterling usage. The system survived until World War II made military enforcement impossible. Then it collapsed in under a decade. The U.S. dollar became the reserve currency after Bretton Woods because it was backed by gold convertibility and the world's largest economy. When Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, the dollar remained dominant not because of gold, but because of the 1973 agreement with Saudi Arabia. Oil would be priced in dollars, and the U.S. would provide military security. That's the petrodollar system: oil for dollars, dollars for security. It worked for 50 years because the arrangement was mutually beneficial. Saudi Arabia got protection, the U.S. got dollar demand. But the January 3rd invasion revealed something different. The system is now maintained through consequences for noncompliance. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Nicolás Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this and was provided multiple, very, very, very generous offers. Translation: accept dollar denomination or face regime change. That's not an economic system. That's a protection racket enforced militarily. And once that becomes explicit, every oil producer in the world understands their position differently. Let's look at what happened in global energy markets in the 72 hours after the Venezuela invasion, because market behavior reveals what participants actually believe. Oil prices spiked from $74 per barrel on January 2nd to $89 per barrel by January 5th, a 20% increase in 3 days. This isn't supply disruption. Venezuela's oil was already under U.S. sanctions. This is risk premium. Every oil exporting country is now pricing in the possibility that currency choice leads to military intervention. The yuan strengthened 1.8% against the dollar in 2 days. Normally, when the U.S. projects military power, the dollar strengthens as a safe haven. This time, the opposite occurred. Why? Because the yuan is now being positioned as the alternative to a system maintained through invasions. Russia immediately announced acceleration of oil-for-goods barter programs with India, China, and BRICS nations. Russia's finance minister explicitly stated, "Venezuela has shown us what happens when you depend on the dollar. We will not make that mistake." Saudi Arabia postponed talks with the U.S. about renewing defense commitments. The Saudis are now reconsidering whether U.S. security guarantees are worth staying in the petrodollar system, if the cost is potential invasion risk. Reports indicate they're accelerating discussions with China about accepting yuan for 20% of oil sales. 14 countries issued a joint statement calling for creation of an alternative international payment system not reliant on the U.S. dollar, including China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and Turkey. This is the cascade pattern. Each defection makes the next one safer. When Venezuela tried to leave the dollar system alone, they were isolated and could be invaded. But when 14 countries coordinate alternatives simultaneously, the cost of enforcement rises exponentially. International law experts, officials in the UN, the U.S., and other countries said the raid violated the UN Charter and Venezuela's sovereignty. The operation succeeded tactically. Maduro was captured. Venezuela will likely return to dollar-denominated oil sales. But strategically, it revealed the enforcement mechanism, and that revelation changes every calculation. Here's the insight. Reserve currency systems in not when alternatives become better, but when enforcement becomes visible. As long as dollar dominance appeared to be the natural result of economic superiority, It was stable. Countries held dollars because dollars were useful, liquid, and trusted. But when dollar dominance is maintained through military intervention against countries that choose alternative currencies, it becomes fragile. Because now every participant knows this is a coerced system, not a voluntary one. And coerced systems fracture the moment participants believe they can escape without being targeted. That moment is accelerating now, not in a decade, not in 5 years, but in months. The pattern is always the same. Soft power works until it doesn't. Then empires switch to hard power, and hard power accelerates the collapse it was meant to prevent. The January 3rd invasion wasn't a war on drugs. It was currency enforcement. And by making that enforcement explicit, it triggered the pattern that ends every reserve currency system in history. China is building alternative payment systems. Russia is expanding barter arrangements. Saudi Arabia is negotiating yuan acceptance. And every oil exporter is now calculating, do we stay in a dollar system maintained by invasion risk? Or do we coordinate exits with enough countries that enforcement becomes impossible? The petrodollar system worked for 50 years because the benefits were real. It's ending because the enforcement became visible. That's the pattern. And once you see it, you understand what comes next. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but financial behavior does. If this breakdown helped you see the pattern more clearly, like the video, subscribe to Economic Pattern Vault, and share your perspective in the comments. Understanding the cycle is how you stay ahead of it.